marking ceremony was supposed to be her triumph. For 18 years, Lysandra had waited for this moment. Thaddeus, Alpha King of Valdoria, was her fated mate. The bond had been foretold since her birth, confirmed by every seer in the kingdom. So when she stood before him at the sacred altar, surrounded by 2,000 witnesses dressed in ceremonial white, with her heart pounding against her ribs, she expected him to mark her. Instead, he looked right through her. The great hall of Valdoria had never been more beautiful. Thousands of candles hung suspended from the vaulted ceiling, their flames casting everything in liquid gold. Garlands of moonflowers and silver thistle draped every pillar. The air was thick with incense and anticipation. This was the night the kingdom had waited for. The night their Alpha King would finally claim his fated mate. Lysandra stood at the base of the altar steps, her hands trembling beneath the flowing sleeves of her ceremonial gown. White silk embroidered with silver thread, the dress of a future queen. Her auburn hair had been braided with pearls, her amber eyes lined with kohl, her skin anointed with sacred oils. Everything was perfect. Everything except the cold dread pooling in her stomach. She glanced up at Thaddeus seated on his throne above her. He was magnificent. Golden-haired, broad-shouldered, with the angular features of ancient warrior kings. Every unmated woman in the realm had wept when the seers announced that Lysandra, a minor noble's daughter, was his destined bride. But in the 3 years since that announcement, Thaddeus had barely spoken to her. When their paths crossed, his blue eyes slid over her like she was furniture, like she was nothing. The high priestess raised her hands and the hall fell silent. "We gather to witness the sacred marking," she intoned. "Let Alpha King Thaddeus of Valdoria claim his fated mate as the moon has decreed." Thaddeus rose from his throne. Lysandra's heart hammered so violently she could hear nothing else. This was it. 18 years of waiting, a lifetime of loneliness about to end. She would finally belong somewhere, to someone. Thaddeus descended the steps slowly, his blue eyes fixed ahead. No, not on her. Past her. Lysandra's blood turned to ice as he walked right by her without a glance. The crowd murmured in confusion. She turned, her body moving on instinct, and watched as Thaddeus stopped in front of her cousin Serafina. Serafina, who was supposed to be standing as her attendant. Serafina, whose green eyes widened in theatrical surprise. Thaddeus, Lysandra heard herself whisper, "What are you doing?" He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge she'd spoken. "I reject the bond decreed by the seers," Thaddeus announced, his voice ringing through the hall. "I choose another. I choose Serafina Vex as my queen and mate." The world stopped. Lysandra couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her wolf howled inside her chest, clawing at her ribs, shrieking in agony. The rejection wasn't metaphorical. It was physical. A serrated blade dragging through her soul, severing something she'd believed was unbreakable. She watched, unable to look away, as Thaddeus tilted Serafina's head and sank his teeth into the curve of her neck. Blood welled around his mouth. Serafina moaned, her eyes fluttering closed in ecstasy. The marking bite, the bond that should have been Lysandra's. And Lysandra shattered. The crowd erupted. Some screamed in outrage. Others cheered. The noble houses that had resented her elevation whispered triumphantly to one another. She was never worthy, they said. The seers were wrong. Lysandra's knees buckled. She would have collapsed right there on the altar steps if a hand hadn't caught her elbow. Steady, a voice murmured. Low, male, unfamiliar. She looked up into eyes black as obsidian. The man was tall, taller than Thaddeus, with shoulders that blocked out the candlelight behind him. His hair was dark as a raven's wing, falling past his jaw in careless waves. His face was beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, sharp, dangerous, utterly without softness. But it was his scent that made her wolf go still. Winter frost, pine trees buried under snow, something ancient and cold that shouldn't exist in a living body. "Who are you?" she breathed. "Someone who just watched you get publicly gutted," he said. His eyes swept over the chaos, over Thaddeus and Serafina, still locked in their marking embrace, over the crowd that had already forgotten Lysandra existed, and someone who finds himself in need of a queen. Before she could respond, he released her arm and strode toward the altar. His footsteps echoed in the sudden hush that fell over the hall. "Thaddeus," his voice cracked through the space like thunder. The Alpha King finally pulled his mouth from Serafina's neck. Blood stained his lips. His eyes blazed with fury as he recognized the intruder. "Kael," he snarled, "you dare set foot in my kingdom tonight, of all nights." Your border guards were disappointingly easy to evade. Kael stopped at the base of the steps, hands clasped behind his back, posture radiating absolute calm. "I came to witness your marking ceremony. Imagine my surprise when I saw you discard your fated mate like spoiled meat. She is none of your concern." "On the contrary," Kael turned to look at Lysandra, "a rejected mate is fair claim. Ancient law, even your high priestess cannot dispute it." The high priestess went pale. "He speaks the truth, your majesty." A rejected mate may be claimed by any alpha who offers protection and status. Thaddeus's face contorted with rage. You cannot have her. She's nothing. Then you won't mind if I take her. Kael extended his hand toward Lysandra. His skin was pale in the candlelight, and she could see the tendons and veins beneath strong and defined. What do you say, he asked her directly, ignoring the horrified nobility, the snarling guards, even Thaddeus himself. Come with me, or stay here and rot in your humiliation. Every eye turned to her, 2,000 witnesses who had just watched her dreams incinerate, 2,000 people who would whisper about this night for generations. Lysandra looked at Thaddeus, hoping he would stop this. Say it was a mistake, take it back. But Thaddeus had already turned away his attention, returning to Seraphina, the woman he'd chosen over destiny itself. The pain in Lysandra's chest hardened into something else, something colder, something sharper. She took Kael's hand, his skin was ice against hers. I'll go with you, she said. Kael's smile didn't reach his eyes. Then you're mine now. He pulled her toward the great doors, his grip unbreakable. Guards lunged forward, but a single look from Kael stopped them cold. His alpha presence crashed over the hall like a winter storm, freezing everyone in place. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in seconds. Breath misted in the air. Candle flames guttered and nearly died. No one moved as he led her out. The last thing Lysandra saw before the doors closed was Seraphina's triumphant smirk and her Aunt Morgana watching from the shadows with an expression Lysandra couldn't read. The carriage was waiting outside the great hall. Black as the night sky, pulled by 4 horses, whose coats shimmered like smoke. Kael handed Lysandra inside without ceremony and followed, closing the door behind them with a decisive click. The moment they were alone, his demeanor changed. The cold amusement vanished. His eyes grew distant, calculating. He sat across from her rather than beside her, and the space between them felt deliberate, like he was establishing a boundary. You have questions, he said. It wasn't a question. Lysandra's mind was still reeling. The rejection throbbed in her chest like a wound that wouldn't close. Every heartbeat hurt. But beneath the pain, something sharper was rising. Anger, confusion. The desperate need to understand what had just happened to her life. Why she managed. Why would you want me? You're Valdoria's enemy. You and Thaddeus have been at war for decades. War's end. Kael's gaze drifted to the window, watching the torch-lit streets of the capital blur past. And queens are useful. You could have any queen. Any princess from any kingdom. Why take a rejected mate? A woman everyone just watched get publicly humiliated. A shadow of emotion crossed his face there and gone before she could name it. Perhaps I enjoy collecting things others have discarded. The words should have stung, but his tone was flat, matter of fact, without cruelty, like he was stating a simple truth rather than trying to wound her. Lysandra studied him in the dim carriage light. His face betrayed nothing. His scent remained that strange winter cold, utterly unreadable. Most alphas radiated heat, their emotions bleeding through their scent, whether they wanted it or not. But Kael smelled like frost and silence. What do you want from me, she asked quietly. The truth. He was silent for a long moment. I need a queen, he said finally. Thornmoor has been without one for 11 years. My council grows restless. Foreign powers grow bold. A king without a mate is seen as weak. His eyes found hers. You will solve that problem. And in return, you'll have everything Thaddeus denied you. A crown, a throne, the respect of an entire kingdom. He paused. What you will not have is love. I have no interest in pretending affection. This arrangement will be political, practical. We will appear united in public. In private, we will live separate lives. Lysandra's wolf stirred weakly in her chest, still wounded from the rejection. She should feel something about his cold proposal. Disappointment. Hurt. But after what Thaddeus had done, Kael's honesty felt almost refreshing. At least he wasn't pretending. No love, she repeated slowly. No affection. Just an arrangement. Does that trouble you? Lysandra laughed. The sound came out, broken, jagged at the edges. An hour ago, I expected my fated mate to mark me. Instead, he chose my cousin. I don't think I'll be seeking love anytime soon, Your Majesty. Something shifted in Kael's expression. Not quite softness, but perhaps the shadow of understanding. There's one more condition, he said. You will never return to Valdoria. Whatever life you had there is over. Your family, your friends, your old identity, all of it ends tonight. From this moment forward, you belong to Thornmoor. He leaned forward slightly. Can you accept that Lysandra thought of her father, who had barely acknowledged her existence since her mother's death when she was 6 years old? Of her Aunt Morgana, whose smiles never reached her eyes? Of Seraphina, who had just taken everything from her? What exactly would she be leaving behind? Yes, she said. I can accept that. Kael nodded once. Good. The carriage continued through the night, carrying her away from the only home she'd ever known. toward a kingdom of enemies, toward a king who wanted nothing from her but her title. But as Lysandra settled back against the velvet seat, she noticed Kael's hands gripping his knees. His knuckles were white, and for just a moment she could have sworn she saw darkness flickering beneath his skin. Like ink moving through water, like shadows with a life of their own. She blinked and it was gone. They traveled through the night and into the next day. The landscape changed around them. The rolling green hills of Valdoria's Oregon territory gave way to steeper terrain. Pine forest grew thicker, darker. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks dusted with snow even in late summer. Lysandra slept fitfully in the carriage, waking often to find Kael sitting motionless in the same position, staring out the window like he hadn't moved at all. He didn't sleep, she realized. Not once during the entire journey. When she woke the final time, it was to unfamiliar sunlight, golden and crisp. The air that came through the window was thin and cold, carrying the scent of high altitude, of Montana. The castle of Thornmoor rose before them, carved from dark stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It perched on the edge of a cliff, with mountains rising behind it like the teeth of some great beast. Snow clung to the peaks even now in the heart of summer. It was beautiful and utterly forbidding. "Welcome home," Kael said, the first words he'd spoken in hours. A woman was waiting in the courtyard when they arrived, silver-haired despite her youthful face with eyes the pale blue of winter sky. She wore servant's clothing but carried herself like nobility. "I am Celestine," she said, her voice low and melodic. "The king has assigned me as your personal attendant." "Attendant or guard?" Lysandra asked before she could stop herself. Celestine's lips curved slightly. Not quite a smile. "Both, perhaps. The king wishes to ensure your safety. Thornmoor can be unwelcoming to outsiders." She led Lysandra to chambers in the eastern tower. The room was vast, easily 3 times the size of her quarters in Valdoria. Silver curtains framed tall windows, overlooking the snow-dusted mountains. The furniture was dark wood and soft furs, elegant without being ostentatious. A fire crackled in the hearth, filling the space with comfort she hadn't expected. Celestine laid out a gown on the bed, deep emerald silk trimmed with black fur, the colors of Thornmoor's royal house. "The contract signing is in 1 hour," Celestine continued. "The king requests your presence in the council chamber." Lysandra dressed quickly, refusing assistance with the laces despite Celestine's offers. She'd dressed herself all her life. She wasn't about to become helpless now. But when she turned to face the mirror, she froze. The woman staring back at her looked like a stranger, hollow-eyed from grief and exhaustion. The rejection still pulsed in her chest, a dull ache that wouldn't fade. The ceremonial braids from last night had come undone, leaving her auburn hair tangled around her face. She looked broken. "May I?" Celestine asked quietly. Lysandra hesitated, then nodded. The servant's hands were gentle as she repaired Lysandra's hair, weaving it into a simple but elegant style that suited the emerald gown. She worked in silence for several minutes before speaking again. "You should know something," Celestine said softly, "about the king." Lysandra met her eyes in the mirror. "What about him? He is not what he appears." Celestine's fingers paused. "The king has not taken a queen in 11 years for reasons the court whispers about, but never speaks aloud. You are the first woman he has brought to Thornmoor since." She stopped, swallowed, since the darkness began. The darkness, Celestine's pale eyes flickered toward the door, as if checking that no one was listening. "He carries something inside him, something that wasn't there before." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Some nights the servants hear sounds from his chambers, inhuman sounds. And every year he grows colder, literally colder. The healers cannot explain it." Lysandra's blood chilled. She remembered the ice of his touch, the frost in his scent, the shadows she'd seen moving beneath his skin. "Why are you telling me this? Because everyone else is too afraid to." Celestine finished the final braid and stepped back. "You have walked into something you don't understand, my lady. The king did not choose you on impulse. Whatever his reasons, they are not what he claims." Her eyes held Lysandra's. "Be careful." Before Lysandra could respond, a knock came at the door. "The king awaits a guard," announced. The council chamber was carved from black stone, the walls lined with ancient tapestries depicting battles and coronations. A long table dominated the center, occupied by men and women whose expressions ranged from curious to openly hostile. Kael stood at the head of the table, dressed in black formal attire that made him look even more severe than he had last night. His dark eyes tracked her entrance, lingering on the emerald gown for just a moment. "Lady Lysandra," he said, "please sit." She took the chair he indicated, aware of every gaze following her movements. "This is the woman." A heavy-set man with a graying beard leaned forward. "The rejected mate of Thaddeus." He said the word like it was diseased. "You expect us to accept her as queen?" "I expect you to accept whoever I choose, Lord Brennan," Kael replied calmly. That is, after all, why you sit on my council and not on a throne of your own. Brennan's face reddened, but he fell silent. Another counselor spoke, a sharp-featured woman with silver streaks through her dark hair. The people will question this, Your Majesty. A queen from an enemy kingdom, one who was publicly discarded. It will be seen as weakness, or worse, as mockery. Then the people will learn otherwise. Kael's voice carried an edge now. When they see her crowned, when they see her seated beside me, when they watch her grow into the Queen Thornmore deserves. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled nobles. Unless any of you wish to challenge my decision directly? Silence? I thought not. Kael gestured to a servant who brought forward a document. The marriage contract. Review it. The counselors passed the pages around, muttering among themselves. Lysandra watched them, trying to read their faces, their sense. Most smelled of suspicion and resentment. A few carried notes of curiosity. None smelled welcoming. She was reading the contract terms herself when the chamber doors crashed open. A man stormed in, young, handsome, with Kael's dark coloring, but none of his cold composure. His eyes blazed with fury as he stalked toward the table. Brother, he snarled, what madness is this? You bring an enemy's cast-off into our home, into our mother's seat. Kedmon Kael's tone didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, tightened. You weren't invited to this meeting. I don't need an invitation. I'm your heir until you produce one of your own. Kedmon's lip curled as his gaze landed on Lysandra, which I assume is the point of this humiliating farce. You're so desperate for a broodmare you'll take another man's scraps. Lysandra's face burned. She opened her mouth to defend herself. Kael moved first. One moment he was standing at the head of the table. The next he had Kedmon pinned against the wall, one hand wrapped around his brother's throat. The council erupted in shouts. You will address your future queen with respect, Kael said. His voice was soft, terrifying. Or you will not address her at all. Do you understand? Kedmon's face purpled. He managed a jerky nod. Kael released him, stepped back, smoothed his jacket as if nothing had happened. The contract will be signed, he announced to the room. The wedding will take place in 3 days. Until then, Lady Lysandra is to be treated with every courtesy owed to my betrothed. His dark eyes swept over the counselors. Anyone who fails to do so will answer to me personally. No one spoke. Lysandra stared at the king who had just defended her honor with casual violence. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge what he'd done or why. But when he returned to his seat, his hand brushed against her shoulder. Just a whisper of contact. Just for a second. And despite everything, Lysandra felt something unfamiliar stir beneath the cold ache in her chest. That night, alone in her chambers, Lysandra replayed the day in her mind. The contract had been signed. The wedding date set. She was going to be queen of a kingdom that didn't want her. Married to a king who didn't love her. Haunted by questions no one would answer. Why had Kael really chosen her? What was the darkness Celestine warned about? And why, when he defended her, had she seen black veins crawling beneath the skin of his hand? Sleep didn't come for hours. When it finally did, she dreamed of ice spreading across a beating heart and a voice whispering in the darkness. He chose you because you're the only one who can save him. Or destroy him. The ceremony was nothing like she'd imagined. There were no moonflowers, no silver thistle, no thousands of candles casting the world in gold. The great hall of Thornmore was lit by torches that burned with pale blue flame, casting everything in cold ethereal light. The guests wore black and emerald rather than white and silver. And instead of joy humming through the crowd, Lysandra felt only tension. They were watching her like prey. She walked the aisle alone as tradition demanded in Thornmore. No father to give her away, no attendants following behind. Just Lysandra in her black wedding gown, moving toward the altar where Kael waited. He stood like a figure carved from midnight itself. Black, formal attire that seemed to drink in the torchlight rather than reflect it. His dark hair was pulled back from his face, revealing the sharp planes of his features. Dangerous and mesmerizing in equal measure. When she reached him, he extended his hand. His skin was ice. You came, he murmured, too quiet for anyone else to hear. Did you think I wouldn't? His gaze shifted, revealing something unguarded for just a moment. I thought you might reconsider. Run while you still could. Where would I go? Lysandra placed her hand in his. Back to Valdoria. Back to being a laughingstock. You could have gone anywhere. Started fresh somewhere. No one knew your name. Spent your life hiding from what happened. She held his gaze. No, I'd rather face it head on. For just a moment, his grip on her hand tightened. Not painfully, almost protectively. Then the high priest began to speak, and the moment passed. The vows were different here. In Valdoria, mates promised eternal devotion, undying love, souls bound across lifetimes. In Thornmore, the vows were simpler, starker. Do you take this woman as your queen and partners? The priest asked Kael. I do. Do you swear to protect her life with your own? I swear it. Do you bind your house to hers, your fate to hers, your blood to hers? Kale's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I bind them. The priest turned to Lysandra. Do you take this man as your king and partner? I do. Do you swear to stand beside him in darkness and in light? Lysandra glanced at Kale. Darkness and light. The words felt weighted with meaning she didn't understand. I swear it. Do you bind your house to his, your fate to his, your blood to his? I bind them. Then by the ancient laws of Thornmoor, the priest said solemnly, I pronounce you bound. King and queen. Partners in rule and in life, he paused. You may seal the bond. In Valdoria, this would have been the marking, teeth and flesh, blood and claiming. Here Kale simply lifted her hand to his lips. The kiss was feather light, his mouth cold against her knuckles. But something sparked at the contact. A jolt of sensation raced up her arm and lodged in her chest. Lysandra gasped softly. Kale's eyes darkened. He'd felt it too. What was that, she breathed. Later he murmured, we'll discuss it later. The crowd erupted in restrained applause. No cheering, no celebration. Just polite acknowledgement that their king had finally taken a queen. Lysandra wondered if anything in Thornmoor was ever warm. The wedding feast passed in a blur of faces and names she wouldn't remember. Lords and ladies offered congratulations that felt more like condolences. Servants refilled her wineglass without being asked. Caedmon glowered from across the hall, his fury barely contained. Through it all, Kale sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. He barely ate, barely drank. But every time someone approached Lysandra with veiled hostility in their scent, he would shift slightly, angling his body between her and the threat. Protecting her without a word, 127 nobles attended. Only 34 offered genuine congratulations. Lysandra counted. At one point, a lord whispered to his companion, just loud enough to be heard, she won't last a month. Kale's head snapped toward them with predatory precision. The conversation around them died. Repeat, that he said quietly. The lord went pale, stammered. Your Majesty, you merely what? Questioned my choice of queen. Suggested she is unworthy. Dead silence blanketed the hall. The lord's throat worked. No, Your Majesty, I apologize. Kale held his gaze for 3 long seconds. Then he turned back to his meal as if nothing had happened. But Lysandra noticed his hand had moved to the armrest between them, close to hers. Not touching, but there. You don't have to fight for me, she told him quietly when the conversations resumed. You're my queen. Kale's tone brooked no argument. What threatens you threatens me. The words shouldn't have affected her. This was an arrangement, political and practical. He'd said so himself. But that night alone in her chamber in the Eastern Tower, Lysandra pressed her hand to her chest and felt her heart beating faster than it should. The bridal chamber was exactly as it had been on her wedding night. Fire roaring in the hearth, furs draped across the bed. Fresh flowers on every surface, though she didn't know who had placed them there. Lysandra stood in the center of it all, still wearing her wedding gown, unsure what to do next. Kale had escorted her to the door, but hadn't followed her inside. The distance between his chambers and hers felt significant, deliberate. A knock came. She tensed. Enter. Kale stepped inside. He'd removed his formal jacket, leaving only a white shirt unlaced at the throat. His hair had come loose from its binding, falling around his face in dark waves. In the firelight, he looked almost approachable. Almost. I wanted to ensure you had everything you need, he said, remaining near the door. The room is perfect, thank you. Silence stretched between them. Lysandra gathered her courage. The contract mentioned producing heirs. Kale went very still. I know we agreed this would be purely political. She continued, her cheeks burning. But I assume that aspect still requires participation. It does. His voice was carefully neutral. But not tonight. She blinked. What you've just been rejected by your fated mate. Publicly humiliated. Torn from your homeland and married to a stranger. He took a single step closer. Whatever the contract requires can wait until you've had time to recover. Lysandra stared at him. You're giving me time. I'm giving you a choice. His dark eyes held hers. Something I suspect you haven't had much of lately. The words hit harder than she expected. Her eyes burned with sudden tears she refused to shed. Why are you being kind to me, she whispered. You said this was political. Practical. You said you had no interest in affection. I don't. But something in his expression shifted. Softened if stone could soften. That doesn't mean I want to cause you pain. He moved toward the door. Lysandra heard herself speak before she could stop. Wait. Kale paused, his hand on the handle. Will you stay? The request came out smaller than she intended. Just for a while. I don't want to be alone tonight. After everything. For a long moment, he didn't move. Didn't speak. Then he crossed to the chair by the fireplace and sat. "I'll stay until you fall asleep," he said quietly, "but I won't share your bed, not tonight." Lysandra knotted her throat too tight for words. She changed behind the dressing screen, trading her wedding gown for a simple night shift. When she climbed into bed, the furs were as soft as they looked, embracing her in comfort. But it was Kael's presence by the fire that finally let her close her eyes. She dreamed of ice again. But this time there was a flame burning at its center, and she couldn't tell if the ice was protecting the flame or trying to extinguish it. When she woke, he was gone, but on the pillow beside her lay a single black rose. And despite everything, Lysandra smiled. In the days that followed, Lysandra learned the rhythms of Thornmore slowly. The morning audiences, where Kael heard petitions from his subjects. The afternoon council meetings, where lords argued about borders and taxes and harvest yields. The evening meals taken in the great hall, surrounded by courtiers who still regarded her with suspicion. She was queen in name, a stranger in truth. But Kael made good on his promise to protect her. When Lord Brennan questioned her right to attend council meetings, suggesting that matters of state were beyond a woman's understanding, Kael cut him off with a single glacial look. "My queen will attend every meeting," he said. "And if you doubt her capacity to understand governance, perhaps you should reconsider your own position on this council." Brennan never questioned her presence again. When Caedmon made a snide comment about her Valdorian accent during dinner one night, calling it grating, to refined ears, Kael had him removed from the hall. His brother didn't return for 3 days. "You're making enemies for my sake," Lysandra told Kael after one particularly tense council session. "I had enemies long before you arrived." Kael refilled her wine glass with his own hands, a gesture that made several nobles exchange glances. "A few more won't make a difference. Still, you don't have to fight my battles. You're my queen." His tone was absolute. "Your enemies are mine to face." A pattern emerged. Every few nights, Kael would appear at her door. Sometimes they talked about the day's events, discussing council politics or border concerns. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, reading or staring at the fire. He never touched her beyond the occasional brush of fingers when passing a book. Never crossed the invisible line between companionship and intimacy. But Lysandra found herself waiting for those visits, looking forward to them in a way that had nothing to do with political arrangements. 3 weeks after the wedding, everything changed. Kael burst into her chambers late one evening without his usual knock. Maps were clutched in his hand, his expression darker than she'd ever seen it. "What's wrong?" Lysandra set down her book immediately. "Thaddeus." The name came out like a curse. "He's moving troops to the eastern border. 500 soldiers, 6 miles from Thornmore territory." He spread the maps across her table. Lysandra studied the markers indicating troop positions. "He's testing you," she said. "He's testing us." Kael's jaw was tight. The marriage was meant to stabilize Thornmore. Instead, it may have provoked him. "You think he'll attack?" "I think he's furious that I took something he discarded." A muscle ticked in his jaw. Thaddeus was always possessive about his toys, even the ones he no longer wanted. Lysandra flinched at the word toys. Kael noticed immediately. "Forgive me, that was poorly phrased." "No." She stood, moving closer to him. "You're right, that's exactly how he saw me. A possession. Something to display until he grew bored, then throw away." She stopped an arm's length from him. "But I'm not his anymore. I'm yours." The words hung between them. Kael's eyes darkened. "You're not a possession, Lysandra. Not to anyone, least of all to me." "Then what am I to you?" He didn't answer, but his hand rose slowly, hovering near her cheek without quite touching. "May I?" he asked, his voice rough. Lysandra's breath caught. "Yes." His palm cupped her face. Cold. So cold, but gentle in a way that made her shiver. "You asked once why I chose you," he murmured. "At the ceremony, when Thaddeus rejected you," his thumb traced her cheekbone. "I chose you because when I watched him discard you, you didn't collapse. You didn't beg. You stood there with your heart breaking, and you refused to shatter." Tears pricked her eyes. That kind of strength is rare. Precious. His gaze intensified. "I wanted to protect it." And now his hand trembled against her skin. "Such a small thing. Such a telling thing. Now I want more than I should," he admitted. Then he kissed her. His lips were cold, but the kiss itself was fire. Soft and searching at first, then deeper, as her hands fisted in his shirt. He pulled her closer, one arm banding around her waist, and Lysandra felt something crack open inside her chest. Not the rejection wound. Something else. Something new. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kael rested his forehead against hers. "I shouldn't have done that," he said. "I wanted you to. That's the problem." He pulled back, his expression anguished. "There are things you don't know about me, Lysandra. Things that make this dangerous." "Then tell me." "I can't." He stepped away, putting distance between them. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." "Kael, I should go." He was already moving toward the door. Forgive me. I shouldn't have come tonight. Wait, she caught his wrist and froze. Beneath his sleeve, dark veins threaded across his skin, spreading from his hand toward his elbow, pulsing with shadow that seemed alive. Kale yanked his arm free, pulled his sleeve down. Forget what you saw, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Then he was gone. Lysandra couldn't sleep. She paced her chambers for hours, replaying the image of those shadowed veins, the fear in his eyes, the way he'd fled like a man being chased by demons. Near midnight, her door opened again. Kale stood in the entrance. His expression was raw in a way she'd never seen. Broken open. Desperate. I shouldn't have run, he said hoarsely. I've been running my whole life from this, from feeling anything. He crossed to her in 3 strides. But I can't run from you. He kissed her with the desperation of a man who had nothing left to lose. Lysandra met him with equal fervor, her hands pulling at his shirt, his fingers tangling in her hair. That night, the night of the winter solstice, they didn't hold back. No careful distance, no invisible barriers. Just 2 people clinging to each other in the darkness, terrified of what the morning might bring. Afterward, Kael held her close, his cold body wrapped around her warm one. I'm sorry, he whispered into her hair. I shouldn't have let this happen. Lysandra didn't understand, but exhaustion pulled her under before she could ask. By dawn, she had made a decision. She would uncover the truth about his curse, whatever it cost. In the days that followed, Lysandra spent her mornings in the library searching through ancient texts with Celestine's help. The servant had become an ally, perhaps even a friend. Tell me about the king's darkness, Lysandra said one afternoon when they were alone among the dusty shelves. Celestine hesitated. Then quietly, his great-grandfather sought power beyond what any alpha should possess. He made a deal with something ancient, something dark. In exchange for the strength to conquer his enemies, he accepted a shadow into his blood. And every king since carries it. The curse sleeps during childhood, awakens when they take the throne, and slowly, year by year, it consumes them. How do I stop it? Celestine's pale eyes were sad. No one ever has. They all die, my lady. The curse completes and they become something else, something inhuman. That same afternoon, Lysandra found the court historian in the archives. Thessaly was ancient, bent with age, but her mind was sharp as any blade. I need to know about luminaries, Lysandra said without preamble. Thessaly's eyes widened. Why would you ask about them? Because someone mentioned they were the only power that could destroy shadow curses. The old woman studied her for a long moment. House Dawnmere was the last of them. Wiped out 30 years ago. A plague, they said. She paused. But plagues don't burn libraries and salt the earth where bodies fell. What are you saying? I'm saying someone wanted them dead. Every last one. But you said a plague? I said, that's what they claimed. Thessaly pulled a tome from a high shelf, blowing dust from its cover. But I've studied the records. This was assassination. Systematic. Thorough. She opened to a page illuminated with gold leaf. House Dawnmere produced luminaries, wielders of pure light, natural enemies of shadow magic. Lysandra stared at the page, at the family tree drawn in careful script. And there near the bottom, a name that made her blood run cold. Ilara of House Dawnmere, married to Garrett Thornwell of Valdoria. That's my mother, Lysandra whispered. Thessaly's breath caught. Your mother, she died when I was 6. My father never spoke of her family, because he didn't know, or chose not to see. Thessaly's hands trembled. If your mother was Ilara Dawnmere and you're her daughter, then you... Lysandra, what's your full name? Lysandra Thornwell. No, your mother's name. The name she gave you, Lysandra Ilara Thornwell. The historian sat down heavily. Gods above. You're the heir, the last of the Dawnmere line. What does that mean? It means you carry the light. You're a luminary. That same night, Kael didn't come to her chambers. Lysandra waited until nearly midnight, then went to find him. She found him in his study, bent over more maps. But when he looked up, she gasped. The dark veins had spread. They mapped his arms entirely, now visible at his collar, threading across his collarbone toward his throat. You're getting worse, she said. Kael didn't deny it. The more I care for you, the faster it spreads. He stood and she saw how carefully he moved. Like every motion cost him. My father died at 30, he said. The same age I am now. I have weeks. Maybe less. Lysandra's horror was visceral. Loving me is killing you, yes. The word fell between them like a stone into still water. Then we fight it, Lysandra said fiercely. Together, you don't understand. There is no fighting it. Every king of my line has tried. Every king has failed. I found something today. She moved closer. My mother was a luminary, which means I am too. Kael's eyes widened. How do you? Thessaly confirmed it. She showed me the records. House Dawnmere. My mother escaped the massacre. And you think that means you can save me? I know it does. Luminaries wield light, light destroys shadow. Or light destroys you. Kael's voice cracked. Channeling that much power could kill you. Kill our... He stopped. His face went white. Kill our what? Lysandra's heart pounded. Kael, what aren't you telling me? But she already knew. The nausea she'd been ignoring for days. The strange sensitivity to smells. The exhaustion that sleep didn't cure. I need to see the healer, she said quietly. The healer confirmed what Lysandra already suspected, 3 weeks pregnant. She found Kael in the practice yard working through sword forms with vicious intensity. His shirt was dark with sweat despite the cold mountain air. I'm pregnant, she said without preamble. Kael's sword clattered to the ground. He didn't move, didn't breathe. His face went blank in a way that made her stomach clench with sudden fear. Say something, she whispered. How far along? The healer estimates 3 weeks. His eyes closed. A shudder ran through him. The winter solstice. Kael. He looked at her then, and his eyes were wet. Lysandra had never seen him cry, had never imagined he could. It's too soon, he said, his voice cracking. I thought we had more time. More time for what? To prepare you, to say goodbye. He laughed, a broken, terrible sound. Every day I spend loving you, and this child is a day closer to my death. Then we fight. Lysandra closed the distance between them. We perform the ritual. I channel light into you and burn out the curse. And if it kills you, kills both of you, then you live. Her hands found his face. You live, Kael, and you raise our child, and you tell them that their mother loved them enough to fight for their father. Tears tracked down his face. I can't lose you. Not now, not when I finally... He fell to his knees before her. His forehead pressed against her belly. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. Lysandra held him, her fingers threaded through his dark hair, her own tears falling onto his bowed head. I can't lose you, he choked out. Not when I finally found... He stopped. His body went rigid. Kael. Lysandra's heart lurched. Kael, what's wrong? He didn't answer. His hands gripped her hips. His breath came in sharp gasps. When he looked up, his eyes had changed. The obsidian irises were shot through with veins of pure black, and his skin was so cold it burned. Run, he rasped. Lysandra, please run. The shadows in the practice yard began to move. The shadows didn't just move. They breathed. They peeled away from the walls of the practice yard like living things. Tendrils of pure darkness reaching toward Kael with hungry intent. His body convulsed, his back arching as the black veins spread visibly across his neck, his jaw creeping toward his face like poison ivy. Kael. Lysandra grabbed his shoulders. Fight it. Stay with me. Can't. His voice was barely human now, layered with something ancient and terrible. Too strong. The love. Feeling you. The child. It woke something. The shadows lunged. Lysandra threw herself over him, instinctively shielding his body with her own. She expected pain, expected to be torn apart by the darkness. Instead, light exploded from her skin. Heat surged through her veins. Not painful, but overwhelming. Like swallowing sunlight. Like becoming the sun itself. Golden blazing impossible light poured from her body, driving the shadows back with an inhuman shriek. The darkness recoiled, writhing against the stone walls, unable to approach while that radiance burned. Lysandra stared at her hands in shock. They were glowing. Actually glowing like she'd consumed a star. What, she gasped. What is this? Kael looked up at her, his eyes slowly clearing, the black veins retreating from his face. You're a luminary, he breathed. Gods above. You're a luminary. The light was already fading, sinking back beneath her skin. But she could still feel it humming there. Warm, powerful, utterly foreign. Before either of them could speak again, the practice yard doors crashed open. Celestine stood in the entrance, her silver hair wild, her pale eyes wide with urgency. Behind her were guards, healers, counselors drawn by the commotion. The shadows, Celestine said. They manifested. They tried. She stopped seeing Lysandra, seeing the last traces of golden light dancing across her skin. Every eye turned to the new queen. How is this possible? Lord Brennan pushed forward. She's Valdorian, common-blooded. There's no magic in her line. Clearly there is. Kael was struggling to his feet, using the practice yard wall for support. Someone bring Thessaly. Now. The court historian arrived within minutes, moving with surprising speed for someone so ancient. She examined Lysandra for long moments, muttering to herself, consulting texts so old their pages crumbled at the edges. Your mother, Thessaly said finally. What was her name, Alara? Lysandra frowned. Why, Thessaly's breath caught. Alara of House Dawnmere. I don't know. My mother died when I was young. My father never spoke of her family, because he didn't know. Or perhaps because he chose not to see. Thessaly's hands trembled as she pulled a tome from her pile. She opened to a page illuminated with gold leaf. House Dawnmere was destroyed 3 decades ago, wiped out by a plague that killed every member of the bloodline. She looked up at Lysandra. Except it seems one daughter who escaped, who married into Valdorian nobility and hid what she was. What she was, Lysandra's voice shook. What was my mother a luminary? Thessaly's eyes gleamed, a wielder of pure light, the natural enemy of shadow magic. The only thing in existence that can destroy the curse eating your husband alive. The courtyard went silent. I can save him, Lysandra whispered. Potentially, Thessaly closed the book, but it would require channeling more light than you've ever touched, more than your body may be able to withstand. She paused. It could kill you both, or it could free him entirely. There's no way to know until you try. Then I'll try. Lysandra, Kael's voice was sharp. No, I won't let you risk yourself, risk our child, and I won't watch you die slowly while I do nothing. She gripped his hands, ignoring their cold. You chose me because I don't shatter. Remember, this is me refusing to shatter. This is different, is it? She stepped closer. You've been fighting this curse alone for years, pushing everyone away so you wouldn't hurt them. But I'm not everyone. Her hands moved to his face. I'm your wife, your queen, the mother of your child. And I'm telling you that we face this together or not at all. Tears gathered in his dark eyes. I can't lose you. Then don't. She kissed him softly. Trust me instead. They prepared the ritual for midnight. The great hall was cleared of furniture. Protective circles drawn in salt and silver on the stone floor. Counselors and servants were evacuated to safe distances. Only Celestine remained standing guard at the doors. Lysandra stood in the center of the circle, Kael facing her. The black veins had spread further in the hours since his collapse. They covered his arms completely now, threading across his collarbone toward his throat like infection racing through bloodstream. His skin was colder than ever. When he breathed, frost formed in the air. If this doesn't work, he said quietly, I want you to know, don't. She pressed her finger to his lips. Tell me after, when you're healed, when we're both alive to hear it. He caught her hand, kissed her palm. Relentless woman. Impossible king. Thessaly began the incantation. Ancient words filled the hall, resonating in Lysandra's bones. She felt the light stirring inside her, responding to the call. It rose like a tide, warm and golden, pushing against the boundaries of her skin. Focus on the Tanden, Thessaly instructed. The connection between you. Let the light follow that path into him. Lysandra closed her eyes, reached for the thread that connected her to Kael. It was there, fragile but real. Not a manufactured bond like what she'd believed she had with Thaddeus. Something different, something they'd built themselves. Choice by choice, moment by moment. She poured her light into it. Kael gasped. His body arched backward as golden radiance flooded through their connection, racing along the bond toward the darkness inside him. The shadows fought back. They erupted from his chest in a wave of pure black, slamming against Lysandra's light with vicious force. She staggered but held firm, feeding more power into the connection. The light and dark crashed against each other like warring armies. The temperature in the hall plummeted. Ice formed on the windows. The torches guttered and died, leaving only Lysandra's golden glow to illuminate the space. And then a voice cut through the chaos. Enough. The words shattered Lysandra's concentration. Her light flickered. The shadow surged. She spun toward the source of the voice. A woman stood at the edge of the circle, tall, elegant, with auburn hair streaked with gray and eyes that Lysandra would have recognized anywhere. Aunt Morgana, she gasped. Morgana stepped over the salt circle like it was nothing. The protective barrier should have stopped her. It was designed to repel shadow entities, not humans who'd bound themselves willingly to darkness. Morgana wore flesh. The circle couldn't see what lurked beneath. You shouldn't have interfered, child, Morgana said. Her voice carried that familiar sweetness, underlaid with something Lysandra had never noticed before. Something cold. You were supposed to complete the curse, not break it. What are you talking about? Lysandra's light flickered uncertainly. What curse? What do you have to do with any of this? Everything, Morgana smiled, and it was not the smile of an aunt. It was the smile of a predator. Who do you think arranged your fated bond with Thaddeus in the first place? The words hit like physical blows. The seers. Lysandra started. We're paid handsomely. Morgana circled the ritual space slowly, her elegant gown trailing behind her. There was never a true bond between you and Thaddeus. I manufactured it. Bribed the seers to declare you fated mates when you were just an infant. Lysandra's hand flew to her chest, to the place where the rejection had ached for months. The pain I felt when Thaddeus rejected me. It was real, I felt it. Oh, the pain was real, Morgana said dismissively. But it wasn't from a broken mate bond. It was from your own belief, your own shame. You expected the bond to hurt, so it did. Her smile turned cruel. The mind is a powerful thing, especially when it's been manipulated since infancy. Horror crashed over Lysandra like a wave. Why, she demanded. Why would you do this? Because I needed you here. Morgana's gaze shifted to Kael, who was on his knees, the shadow still writhing beneath his skin. I needed you bound to the last Shadowborn king, your love accelerating his curse, your devotion feeding the darkness until it consumed him completely. She laughed softly. Love is such a useful tool. It makes people so delightfully stupid. Lysandra's mind raced. The rejection. Thaddeus choosing Seraphina instead of me. All arranged, Seraphina was easy to manipulate. Morgana examined her fingernails. Promise a girl a crown and she'll do anything. She stopped directly in front of Lysandra. I knew you wouldn't stay in Valdoria after being publicly humiliated. I knew you'd accept any escape offered, and I knew Kael would offer. Her smile sharpened. He's been watching you for years, you know. The sad little princess with no mother and a father who despised her. He thought he was being clever attending the ceremony to steal Thaddeus's rejected mate. He didn't realize I'd been counting on exactly that. You manipulated everyone. The horror of it crashed over Lysandra. My whole life, everything that's happened to me. You orchestrated all of it, not all. Morgana's expression flickered with something like frustration. Your mother was supposed to die before she could pass her power to you. But Elara was stubborn. She hid her nature even from me, her own sister-in-law. I didn't realize you'd inherited the luminary gift until tonight. Sister-in-law. A chill swept through Lysandra's veins. You married my father's brother. I married into your family specifically to find Elara. To end the Dawnmere bloodline once and for all. Morgana's eyes glittered with ancient malice. I've been hunting luminaries for centuries, child. One by one, I've extinguished every light that could threaten my master's plans. Your master. The shadow itself. Morgana's voice dropped to a reverent whisper. The entity that Kael's great-grandfather invited into his bloodline. It promised power to his house, but its true goal was always to find a vessel strong enough to contain it fully, to be reborn into flesh. She looked at Kael with something like hunger. 5 generations of Shadowborn kings, each one bringing it closer to manifestation. And Kael is the final vessel. When the curse completes, the shadow will consume him entirely and walk the world in his body. Kael made a strangled sound. The veins on his neck pulsed violently. You used me, Lysandra breathed. Used my love to accelerate his curse, to speed up this possession. Your love is doing exactly what I needed. Morgana reached out to touch Lysandra's face. Such a good girl. Such a perfect pawn. Lysandra slapped her hand away. I'm no one's pawn. The light inside her flared, brighter than before, hot enough that Morgana stumbled backwards, shielding her eyes. Not anymore, Lysandra said. Morgana's eyes narrowed. You think your little spark can stop what's been building for 5 generations? The shadow is ancient, eternal. Your light is nothing compared. My light isn't alone. Lysandra grabbed Kael's hand. The connection between them blazed to life. Not just the bond they'd built, but something deeper. The life growing inside her. Their child. A fusion of shadow and light that should have been impossible. Power exploded outward. Morgana screamed, thrown backward by the radiance. The shadows inside Kael shrieked in answer, fighting against the golden tide. But it was different now. The light wasn't just attacking the darkness. It was merging with it, transforming it. Lysandra saw flashes of understanding in the brilliance. The curse wasn't just shadow, it was shadow corrupted, twisted by the entity that had attached itself to the Shadowborn line. But shadow itself wasn't evil. It was simply the other half of light, the balance that made existence whole. The entity had broken that balance. She could restore it. Kael, she shouted over the roaring power. Don't fight the shadow. Accept it. It's part of you, not the monster wearing its face. His eyes met hers through the chaos, those dark eyes that had always held such coldness, such carefully maintained distance. But now she saw what that coldness truly was. Not absence of feeling, fear of feeling, terror that every emotion would bring him closer to destruction. I don't know how, he gasped. Yes, you do. She gripped his hand tighter. You've been fighting yourself your whole life. Stop fighting. Stop being afraid. Tears streamed down her face. Let me in, all the way. Trust that I can hold both parts of you. Something broke behind his eyes. The last wall, the final barrier he'd kept between himself and everyone who'd ever tried to love him. He stopped fighting. The shadow and light collided inside him, not destroying each other, intertwining. The corruption that had twisted the darkness for 5 generations burned away in golden flames, leaving only pure shadow behind. And that shadow embraced the light like a long-lost twin. They merged. The entity that had corrupted his bloodline for 5 generations shrieked as it was torn from its host. It manifested in the air above them, a writhing mass of pure malevolence, formless and furious, a thing that had existed before the world had shape, a hunger that knew only consumption. Morgana scrambled to her feet. No, master. Take me instead. Let me be your vessel. The entity turned toward her. For one terrible moment, Lysandra thought it would accept, would pour itself into Morgana and continue its centuries-long quest for flesh. Then Kael raised his hand. Shadow and light danced across his palm in perfect harmony. No longer corrupted, no longer at war, simply balanced. Darkness and radiance existing as one, the way they had at the beginning of all things. You are never welcome here, he said. His voice resonated with power both dark and bright. This ends now. He closed his fist. The entity shattered. Its death scream echoed through the hall, through the castle, through the very foundations of Thornmoor. The sound was the death of stars, the silence after the last breath, the end of an age of corruption. Morgana collapsed, her borrowed centuries catching up with her all at once. Her skin withered, her hair turned white as bone. Within moments, only dust remained where she had stood. Silence fell. Lysandra's legs gave out. Kael caught her before she hit the ground, pulling her against his chest. His arms wrapped around her, and for the first time since she'd known him, his skin was warm. You're warm, she sobbed. Kael, you're warm. I know. His voice splintered. I can feel it. I can feel everything. He pulled back to look at her, and his eyes were clear. No black veins, no creeping shadow, just him. Just the man beneath the curse. You saved me. We saved each other. He kissed her, not the cold, careful kisses they had shared before. This was fire and sunlight and everything they'd both been too afraid to feel. His hands cupped her face, her fingers tangled in his hair, and neither of them cared that they were kneeling in the wreckage of a ritual circle while half the castle pounded on the sealed doors. When they finally broke apart, Kael pressed his forehead to hers. I love you, he said. I should have told you before. I was afraid saying it would kill me. He laughed, the sound bright and unfamiliar and wonderful. And now I'm afraid not saying it would kill me faster. His hand moved to her belly. I love you, Lysandra. I love our child. I love the life we're going to build together. Even though I'm stubborn, especially because you're stubborn. He kissed her again, softer this time. Stubborn enough to save a man who'd convinced himself he couldn't be saved. The doors burst open. Counselors and guards flooded in, weapons drawn ready for battle. They stopped at the sight before them, their king glowing faintly with balanced shadow and light, their queen radiant with power she was only beginning to understand. The ritual circle scorched into the stone floor, and a pile of dust where something ancient and evil had finally died. Lord Brennan was the first to kneel. Your Majesties. One by one the others followed. 2 weeks later, a messenger arrived from Valdoria. Lysandra was in the council chamber when the herald was announced. She'd taken to attending every meeting, learning the intricacies of governance, proving her worth to the nobles who had doubted her. Her hand rested on her belly, where a small bump was just beginning to show. Kael sat beside her, his fingers intertwined with hers on the armrest between their chairs. The black veins were gone completely. His skin held a healthy warmth. He smiled more easily now, laughed more freely. The curse's absence had transformed him. Your Majesties, the herald said, bowing low. King Thaddeus of Valdoria requests an audience. He comes to sue for peace. The council chamber erupted in mutters. Some counselors demanded they refuse. Others argued for caution. Kael looked at Lysandra. What say you, my queen? Let him come, she said clearly. I want to see his face. 3 days later, Thaddeus arrived with an entourage of 20 guards. They were led into the throne room where Kael and Lysandra waited. Lysandra watched Thaddeus's face as he entered, watched his eyes track from her crown to her emerald gown, to the visible swell of her belly, to Kael's arm around her shoulders. Something flickered in Thaddeus's expression. Regret, perhaps, or the belated recognition of what he'd thrown away. I come to negotiate peace, Thaddeus began. Lysandra cut him off. You come because you're losing. She stood, and the entire court fell silent. 3 border skirmishes, all defeats. Seraphina's incompetence is destroying Valdoria from within. Your nobles whisper about your judgment. Your people question your rule. She descended from the dais, moving closer to him. And you regret your choice. Thaddeus's jaw tightened. A muscle ticked beneath his eye. He said nothing, but the truth was written across his face. You rejected me before 2,000 witnesses, Lysandra continued. Called me nothing. Discarded me like I was worth less than the dirt beneath your feet. She stopped directly in front of him. And now you crawl here begging peace from the nothing you threw away. Thaddeus's hands clenched at his sides. Lysandra turned to Kael. What say you, my king? Kael studied Thaddeus for a long moment. I say we grant peace, not because he deserves it, but because we are better than him. He stood moving to Lysandra's side. Because we have something more important than revenge. We have a kingdom to build, a child to raise, a future to create. His hand found the small of Lysandra's back. And we won't let his mistakes poison that. The treaty was drawn up that afternoon. Thaddeus would publicly acknowledge Lysandra as Queen of Thornmoor, would recognize her authority and status, would pay reparations for the border attacks. And Seraphina would remain his queen, his burden, his daily reminder of the catastrophic choice he'd made. As Thaddeus signed the document, his hand shook slightly. Before he left, he turned back to Lysandra. "I was wrong about you," he said quietly. "Yes," Lysandra replied, "you were." She didn't elaborate, didn't explain how wrong or what he'd lost. She simply watched as he walked away, this man who had shaped so much of her pain now reduced to an afterthought in her story. That evening, the council gathered for a formal ceremony. The treaty would be announced publicly the next day. But tonight was for Thornmoor's court alone. Lord Brennan stood before the assembled nobles. "I doubted this marriage," he said. His voice carried through the hall. "I questioned our king's choice. I was wrong." He turned to Lysandra. "Queen Lysandra saved our king from a curse that has plagued our kingdom for 5 generations. She faced down an ancient evil and emerged victorious. She has proven herself worthy of the crown she wears." He knelt. "She has my loyalty, now and always." One by one, the other nobles followed, all 127 of them, even those who had whispered against her, even those who had called her nothing. When Caedmon approached, he knelt like the others, but then he looked up at her and his expression was sincere. "I was cruel to you," he said, "unforgivably so. You're the best thing that ever happened to my brother. And I was too blind to see it." He paused. "Forgive me." "You're forgiven," Lysandra said. "We're family now." She helped him to his feet. And family doesn't keep tallies. 6 months later, the gardens of Thornmoor had never been so beautiful. Spring had come early that year. Flowers bloomed that hadn't been seen in decades. The servants whispered that the king's curse had kept the land cold, and now that it was broken, life was returning. Lysandra sat beneath a flowering tree, her daughter cradled in her arms. The birth had been difficult but quick. Thessaly had been astonished when she first examined the infant. She carries both, the historian had breathed. Shadow and light, perfectly balanced. She's the first of her kind, and we don't yet know what that will mean when her power wakes. They'd named her Isolde, a new name for a new beginning. The baby had Kael's dark hair and Lysandra's amber eyes. But when she slept, faint shadows danced across her skin, chased by flickers of golden light, a living embodiment of the balance her parents had fought to achieve. "There you are." Lysandra looked up as Kael approached. His formal jacket was discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked younger now, lighter. The permanent furrow between his brows had smoothed, and he smiled freely in ways that still made her heart skip. "Council meeting finished?" she asked. "Early for once." He sat beside her, his arm coming around her shoulders. "Lord Brennan actually agreed with something I proposed. I think he's been replaced by a changeling." Lysandra laughed. "Perhaps he's simply adjusting to the new Thornmoor." "Perhaps." Kael leaned over to kiss Isolde's tiny forehead. "How is my fierce little shadow fed and changed and completely unimpressed by her father's political achievements, as she should be? Politics are boring." He settled back against the tree, pulling Lysandra closer. "This is what matters. You, her, us." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunlight dance through the leaves. So much had changed in the past year. Thaddeus had kept to the terms of the treaty. Valdoria remained stable, though rumors said the king grew more withdrawn with each passing month. That he spent hours staring at the portrait of Lysandra that still hung in the eastern wing. That he'd removed Seraphina from most royal duties after she'd insulted a foreign dignitary. Caedmon had become Lysandra's staunchest defender in council. He'd never apologized again after that first time, but his actions spoke louder than words. When nobles questioned her decisions, Caedmon was first to back her judgment. Celestine had confessed that she'd been ordered to watch Lysandra closely those first weeks, to report any signs of luminary power. But she'd grown to care for her charge, and when the truth came out, she'd chosen Lysandra's side over ancient orders. And Thornmoor itself had changed. The land was warmer. The people smiled more easily. Children played in courtyards that had been silent for a generation. The shadow that had hung over the kingdom for 5 generations had finally lifted. "Do you ever regret it?" Kael asked quietly. "Coming with me that night, leaving everything behind for a stranger who offered you nothing but cold practicality?" Lysandra shifted to face him. "You offered me more than that. You offered me a choice, the first real choice anyone had given me in my entire life." She touched his face, marveling as always at the warmth of his skin. "And I chose well, even though I was dying, even though I pushed you away at every turn. Even then," she kissed him softly, "you were worth fighting for, Kael. You still are." His arms tightened around her. I don't deserve you. Probably not, she grinned. But you're stuck with me now. Ancient law. A claimed queen cannot be returned. He laughed, the sound echoing through the garden. Is that so? Absolutely. I read it in a very old book. Thessaly confirmed it. Well, if she confirmed it, it must be true. Isolde stirred between them, making a small sound of complaint at being jostled. They both stilled, immediately watching with bated breath as she settled back into sleep. She has your stubbornness, Kale whispered, and your dramatic timing, a dangerous combination. The best kind. They sat together as the afternoon light warmed the gardens of Thornmoor, the kingdom that had been cold for so long, the king who had been frozen even longer, and the rejected mate who had turned out to be exactly what they both needed. Lysandra thought of that terrible night at the marking ceremony, the moment Thaddeus had walked past her, the shattering pain of rejection, the 2,000 witnesses who had watched her dreams incinerate. If someone had told her then that it would lead here to love, to family, to a happiness she'd never dared imagine, she wouldn't have believed them. But that was the thing about fate. Sometimes the path that seemed like destruction was actually leading somewhere better. Sometimes the rejection was a redirection. Sometimes the enemy's hand was the one that saved you. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, the cold king who claimed you as a political convenience turned out to be your true home all along. I love you, Lysandra murmured against Kael's shoulder. I know. He pressed a kiss to her hair. I love you too. Always. Above them, the shadows of leaves danced with the sunlight, intertwined and inseparable, darkness and light in perfect balance, just as it should be. Though sometimes late at night when Isolde slept, Lysandra would see faint shadows flicker across the nursery walls, not malevolent but watching, a reminder that balance required vigilance, that the peace they'd won was not an ending but a beginning, and she was ready.